Chapter 15. Madrid Conference. The following article appeared in the October 31st, 1991 Jewish Telegraphic Agency entitled Few Signs of Peace in the Mideast as Parties Gather in Madrid. While Arab and Israeli delegates were being urged to negotiate an end to their conflict in Madrid, few signs of peace were evident in and around the land that is the source of their dispute. Israelis mourned their latest fatalities: 3 soldiers killed by a landmine in southern Lebanon on Tuesday, and 2 civilians gunned down in a bus ambush Monday in the West Bank. Calls for revenge filled the streets. Israeli Defense Force soldiers shot dead a 19-year-old Palestinian during an anti-Israel demonstration in the West Bank on Wednesday, while Palestinians also battled each other. More than 50 were injured in factional strife between supporters of the peace process and advocates of continued armed struggle. 4 of the injuries were stab wounds. Israel's Ministerial Defense Committee met to discuss the worsening situation on the Lebanese border. Foreign Minister David Levy presided, in the absence of Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, who is heading the Israeli delegation in Madrid. Levy, a deputy prime minister, was not in the best of moods. He was deeply hurt when Shamir announced he would lead the Israeli peace team to Madrid and decided to stay home. Defense Minister Moshe Aarons blamed Syria directly for the latest attacks on the Israel Defense Force in southern Lebanon. His remarks only added to the tension between the two bitter neighbors. Likud Knesset member Yoshua Sagui accused the Syrians of hypocrisy for going to the peace conference while abetting murderous attacks on Israel. Aarons told the Knesset later that it was important to tackle the peace process without illusions, yet with the will to make a breakthrough. But he did not say how Israel should respond to the latest violence. Knesset member Hanan Porat of the National Religious Party, who advocates maximum Jewish settlement in the administered territories, urged militancy as a solution. He demanded that the IDF find new ways to curb the intifada. He called on the Israeli delegates in Madrid to boycott prominent Palestinians such as Hanan Ashrawi, whom he accused of encouraging terrorism. Ashrawi is not a member of the official Palestinian delegation, but speaks for the 6-member advisory group accompanying it to Spain. Knesset member Benjamin Bel Elazir of the opposition Labour Party warned of the growing escalation in southern Lebanon. He noted that the Syrian-backed Lebanese Regular Army has done nothing to curb the anti-Israel raids of Shiite fundamentalists. The Islamic fundamentalist Hamas movement in the Gaza Strip, which has pledged violence to derail the peace talks, called yet another general strike in the administered territories. It was widely observed more out of fear of Hamas terror tactics than support for the extremist cause. In fact, pro-peace rallies were staged by Arabs in the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood and the Shati refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, former Intifada trouble spots. The following article appeared in the November 4th, 1991 Jewish Telegraphic Agency entitled Peace Fever Seizes Palestinians, Bearing Olive Branches of Peace. Peace fever seized the Palestinian population in East Jerusalem and throughout the administered territories over the weekend. Crowds, among them scores of former security prisoners, marched through streets bearing olive branches. Israeli security forces stood by, but for the most part did not interfere. The Palestinians' jubilation was over the appearance of their delegation at the Middle East Peace Conference, which opened October 30th in Madrid's Royal Palace. Although it is officially a joint Jordanian-Palestinian delegation, the 14 Palestinian delegates representing the territories were in the limelight of the world news media. For the first time in history, the Palestinians had a validated identity. Thousands at the peace demonstration saw it as the herald of independence. Israeli authorities cooperated to the extent of lifting the curfew in Gaza and removing the roadblocks that kept West Bank Palestinians from entering Jerusalem during the opening of the Madrid conference. The curfew and the barriers were aimed at the anti-peace element, notably the Islamic fundamentalist Hamas, which exhorted Palestinians to continue the armed struggle. Clashes between pro- and anti-peace activists left 50 wounded in the Gaza Strip over the weekend. The biggest peace demonstration was held Friday afternoon in a schoolyard in Ramallah. The main speakers were such Palestinian notables as Dr. Sari Nusseibeh and Zayed Abu Zayed. They could very well have gone to Madrid as part of an unofficial group advising the Palestinian delegates, but preferred to stay home. Nusseibeh appealed to the superpowers to take an active role in the peace process, not be mere observers. The common theme of the speeches was to urge the populace to take to the streets with olive branches, the universal symbol of peace, instead of rocks, the principal weapon of the Intifada. Observers noted that the leaders of public opinion in the Palestinian towns mostly were former inmates of Israeli prisons. Having earned their spurs, they are now influencing policy. The rally ended with a large parade down the main street, which was awash with olive branches. Similar demonstrations took place in other West Bank towns, though on a small scale. The only confrontation was in East Jerusalem, where police dispersed peace demonstrators outside the Rockefeller Museum and detained several Palestinians who violated public order. The following article appeared in the January 3, 1992 Jewish Telegraphic Agency entitled "More than 145,000 Jews from the USSR Made Aliyah During Its Final Year." The Soviet Union may have ceased to exist, but the stampede of Jews surging from its 15 former republics continued without interruption in 1991, despite a slight dip this fall. According to the National Conference on Soviet Jewry, a total of 145,005 Jews from the former USSR made Aliyah in 1991, bringing overall immigration to Israel to a grand total of 170,740. The figures failed to match the peak year 1990, during which a record 186,815 immigrants arrived in the Jewish state, 181,750 from what was still then the Soviet Union. But the monthly decline that began in July and hit a low of 8,000 arrivals from the Soviet Union in November appears to have been reversed, as 10,350 Soviet Jews came to Israel in December, during the one-time superpower's final days. That represents a 28% increase in 1 month alone. 1991 was also the second biggest year for Soviet immigration to the United States. According to the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, a total of 34,715 Jews from what was the Soviet Union arrived here last year under the U.S. refugee program. That figure fell short of the 1989 total of 36,738, and was considerably lower than expectations at the outset of the year. All immigration is sensitive to changing conditions. If in 1991 Soviet Aliyah was down about 1/5 from the previous year, it should be remembered that 1991 was a more tumultuous year. It began with the Persian Gulf War, which bred uncertainty and paralyzed travel to the Middle East. Then mid-year, the Soviet government changed its immigration laws, requiring passports to leave the country. By year's end, the country had split up into 15 separate republics. Shoshana Kardin, chairman of the National Conference on Soviet Jewry, said it was gratifying that despite a year of dramatic upheaval, both in the Middle East, where Operation Desert Storm threatened normal immigration, and later in the year with the demise of the Soviet Union, Soviet Jews continued to arrive in Israel in a steady stream. A continuing disincentive with longer-term repercussions is the rising unemployment in Israel. An estimated 40,000 new olim are on the dole. Of those who find work, few are employed in the professions or skills they were trained for. Inevitably, letters home advise relatives and friends to postpone emigration until conditions improve. Nevertheless, at year's end, the Jewish Agency said it expected between 150 to 170,000 to arrive in Israel in 1992, virtually the same as 1991, though it could handle greater numbers if required. Agency officials noted that about 105,000 Jews already had Soviet exit visas, and 45,000 of them also have Israeli entry visas. It is expected that the individual republics will honor the Soviet visas. But Kardin said she is still concerned with free Jewish emigration from the Soviet Union's successor states. She referred to still unresolved cases of refuseniks and the problem of poor relatives holding up the departure of would-be immigrants. There seems to have been some attrition. Jewish agency sources claim that more than 9,000 Soviet Jews left Israel for South Africa in 1991, and that another 5,000 are seeking South African entry visas. The Absorption Ministry claims that only 500 families, about 1,500 people, actually left the country. Ethiopia continued to be the second largest source of Aliyah. About 20,000 Jews arrived in Israel from that country during 1991, some 14,000 of them in a single 36-hour period last May by an emergency airlift known as Operation Solomon. Some 4,500 Jews are left in Ethiopia, but the Jewish Agency is optimistic they can be gotten out soon and reunited with families in Israel. Immigration absorption problems persist. About 11,300 Ethiopian Olim are still living in hotels. The Jewish Agency hopes to move all of them into permanent housing by next June. Summing up, Israel's population now stands at 5,050,000, swollen by the 340,000 Jews who have arrived from the former Soviet Union since the Aliyah wave began in 1989. The population grew at a rate of 4.7% in 1991, a slowdown compared to 1990 when the growth rate was 5.7%.